Hello everyone, and welcome to our channel. Before the story begins, make sure you've subscribed. It's completely free, and it ensures you'll never miss a jaw-dropping twist or thrilling adventure. Your support means everything to us. It fuels our passion and helps this storytelling community grow stronger every single day. Wishing you a day full of peace, joy, and inspiration. Disclaimer: this is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or real events is purely coincidental. This story is created solely for entertainment and does not promote or glorify violence in any form. Now sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's story. Most species fear death worlds. Few send clerks into orbit around one. Terran Holt wasn't a warrior, a spy, or even a doctor. He was just a paperwork guy. But when he sat down in an alien exam chair and said, "I've regrown my nose," the galaxy got a reminder of what Earth really is. International travel has long been the bane of most species' existence. Medical checkups, quarantine confirmation that the applicant has indeed complied with the nation's legal requirements, interstellar travel, particularly between different species territory, is even worse. Tarinoing Cloak Medical Station, as its name translated to the human lingua franca of English, was an enormous complex the size of a moon set into independent orbit near the Asav planet of Zarvonis. Zarvonis, as one of the worlds on the fringe of Asav space, was a designated port of call for many new arrivals. This was not to say that visitors all had to set foot on the planet, as that would be terribly inefficient. The world instead had an entire data complex tasked with collecting information and distributing that to the actual planned sites of arrival. Every single new arrival, at least in this sector of Asav space, was required to visit Tarinoing Cloak to prove that he or she, or occasionally, it was in compliance with the laws and customs of the Federated Asav Republic. Only 2 sections of Tarinoing Cloak were actually designed for emergency medical procedures. The other 10 were all for medical checkups and cross-referencing data. To William Warren, whose chosen nickname of Terran confounded his alien colleagues, Tarinoing Cloak was an impressive and welcome sight. The enormous facility reminded him of a flower, specifically a rose. He was no botanist and could not tell you the parts of a flower, but the station had 12 outer petals and 12 smaller inner petals, all attached to a narrowing stem that descended from the center. Terran had lived on the Mars Habitat Cluster, Mars Habitat Theta 9, for his entire life before the exciting reassignment had been passed down to him. As he had no family to tie him down, he would be an ideal member for the foreign exchange program to foster unity between the existing galactic species and their new human neighbors. Terran Holt was no great hero or a famous figure, no master diplomat or military quartermaster. Terran was what every civilian required: a clerk. Terran had worked for a decade under the Space Exploration Force, handling the tedium of registering and cross-referencing individual interstellar vessels. Despite the humans having different tendencies when it came to how they handled their civilian ships, the job was close enough that he could be easily slotted into another government's similar division. Hence, his deployment to the Republican Transit Corps. For Terran, who'd never even been to Earth, traveling to an alien territory to live and work on an exotic planet was unbelievably exciting. For Zarel, the whole thing was unbelievably annoying. The Asov worked for the Republican Transit Corps, seconded to the Galactic Transit Authority, and, due to his own lack of significant family, had been assigned to acclimate Terran to the Asov work as a classic lifestyle. On the one hand, it was paid time that he didn't have to spend working. On the other, it was time spent mentoring a strange pink thing that looked like someone had ironed, dyed, and decorated an Asov. The Asov and humans regarded one another with some degree of fascination, reminding the other of classic science fiction aliens. For humans, while the Asov were not the right color, their slender builds and large heads reminded of the classic little green men. Yes, Asov were a dark blue rather than green, sported luminous yellow eyes instead of solid black orbs, had pointed ears, and their bodies were covered in folds of skin that humans claimed to be reminiscent of a Shar-Pei. But there were enough similarities for humans to be fascinated when they first saw the shoulder-height blue aliens. Humans, on the other hand, had initially frightened the Asov due to their resemblance of a myth from their home world of Keldrakis, the Slender Ones. The myth was that tall, almost ethereal purple beings would slip into your home and abduct you for any manner of horrific experiments, only to replace you the next morning, most of the time. Tarin had been the first human Zarel had met in person, and thus far he was shockingly dull. From the stories he'd heard, Zarel had expected humans to all be bizarrely cheerful while juggling knives and setting their own hair on fire. Tarin Holt was just normal. He was relatively small for a human, with pale, yellow hair on his head and an unusually pink tinge to his skin. Tarin was interested in Asov's sports and was happy to talk about his own favorite team back home, though thus far the rules of football made no sense to Zarel. The only saving grace for Zarel was that he'd had time to prepare. In the wake of humanity's arrival on the Galactic stage, they'd happily shared advice to help preserve life aboard habitats and arcologies should the worst occur. And Taranoing Cloak Medical Station had been shut down for 2 years, while the Asov performed a maniacally fast retrofit and upgrade. Now the station was compliant with new galactic standards, human standards, and incorporated other human ideas. Seated beside Terran, in the enormous freighter drifting smoothly toward a docking port on the medical station, Zarel ran the human through the basics one more time. "It's simple and expedient," he said, his voice slightly high-pitched and with a reverberation common to Asov. "While the assistant physician gives you a cursory exam, you will fill out your medical history. They'll cross-reference us, of course, but different species can have issues with releasing information freely, plus the whole issue of different jargons. Better to have the patient giving a first-hand account. Then when that's done, the physician comes in to discuss with you any additional procedures you need done to safely live and work in Asov's base. No quarantine." Terran's voice was as plain as he was, flat and gentle, the kind of man who goes along to get along. Zarel shrugged, a gesture that Asov and human shared. "Depends entirely on if you need it. Most people don't, honestly." The freighter's warning klaxon blared gently, a strange combination of words, but it was the only thing that made sense to Terran's ears. It was the alert to make certain you were strapped in. Freighters were not just for mass transport of goods, but also served as the primary budget transit system. The trip was mostly smooth, but docking was always a jarring experience. He clutched the harness holding him in his seat and gritted his teeth so he wouldn't bite his tongue if the docking clamps were particularly rancorous this time. After an impactful docking, Zarel led Tarin into the station proper. Tarinoing Cloak was massive enough to have multiple custom sections in all 10 petals. As Tarin mentally referred to them, and comparatively, there weren't that many new visitors to Asov's space, so it didn't take more than an hour of waiting in line before he was properly checked in and now ready to wait for his appointment. Zayrel gave Tarin a small smile. Asov's lips turned up at their corners, but they very rarely bared their teeth in any sort of friendly gesture. Of course, the weight of the skin fold above the upper lip and on their cheeks might also have something to do with that. I'll see you after your appointment, Tarin. Call me if you need help, but hopefully you shouldn't. Zayrel was all too eager to visit the guest area, get a nice glass of juice, and get a good buzz going. Tarin nodded. See you later, then. He stepped up and presented his credentials to one of the receptionists, a Nicti woman. At least, he thought it was a woman. Nicti were large, lean insects, rather like sleek gray grasshoppers. They had 4 eyes, 2 on each side of their heads, and all 4 could rotate independently. Being insects, the Nicti did not present easy sexual dimorphism for humans to distinguish. The contact package he'd read made him somewhat confident that it was a woman, but he didn't feel much better than a coin flip. "Take a seat, sir," she rasped. "We'll be with you shortly." Tarin did so, and a tablet popped out of his chair asking for his medical history. He was a tad confused, as he was relatively certain his government would have forwarded such, but he filled it in since it was asked of him. When he was finished, Tarin looked around, rather amazed to find just how alike this place was to any other doctor's office. It was massive, the big box store of doctors' offices, but the layout was similar to human waiting rooms. There were even screens on the walls displaying various news feeds. He was in the middle of watching a feed on a recent military conflict when he was at last pinged and called through one of the several sliding doors. The assistant physician, as Zayrel had referred to the position, was quite the surprise. The Asav, Nicti, the Quegs, and Dithrians were the most common species in the galaxy, but there were numerous other minor species that either had never made it to spaceflight on their own, or had some other limitation that kept them from proliferating across the stars. Standing before him was a crustacean being called a Moritan. The exoskeleton alien, Tarin racked his brain to recall their sexual delineations because he remembered they were strange, but was drawing a blank on exactly what he thought was strange about them. Was about a head taller than him, long and spindly, rather like a shrimp, with a head like a crab. A mostly flat disc of carapace spread out horizontally. 2 stalk-like eyes rose up from the front, and beneath them was a double set of gnashing mandibles, one set within the other. "This way, sir," the Moritan croaked, and Tarin followed the blotchy brownish creature. The Moritan, like the rest of the medical staff on billowing cloak, wore green. Most species tended to put their medics in outfits that best showed blood, and being that this station was in Asav space and the mammals had yellow blood, it made sense. The assistant physician, Tarin knew that in human areas the term was physician's assistant and abbreviated PA, so would this be an AP? Led him into an examination room. In the center was a strange chair that looked like some sort of cushioned torture device. Dark red padding rested on white polymer, and the entire thing was comprised of multiple armatures that moved independently, all emerging from a point in the floor. Before his eyes, it shifted into almost a chair-like shape, although it looked like his weight would be shifted forward and centered on the armrests. "Please, have a seat." The crustacean spoke as it gestured to the maybe chair. Tarin hesitated, trying not to look as if he didn't trust this device. How do I sit in it? I'm not really familiar with this kind of tech." The AP gestured with one lanky arm. "Your physique is similar enough to an Asav, so rest your haunches there, your upper arms there." Tarin complied, but was perplexed. "By the way, why did I have to fill out that medical history thing? I'd have thought that Commonwealth would have sent my medical info ahead of me." He settled into the seat and was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't really uncomfortable. simply an odd way to rest his weight. As the Moraton began applying an advanced stethoscope, Terran realized that the chair was designed to provide access to his vital organs. They did. The assistant physician replied as it began examining his lungs. However, it is often useful to get a patient's history in their own words, as well as the clinical interpretation. Terran shrugged, but was quickly admonished with a, "Don't do that, sir," from the AP. Aliens didn't always share too many similarities to humans, but enough of them had bilateral symmetry and expressed discomfort through body language close enough to be considered universal. Terran hoped that he was reading it correctly and not about to make an ass of himself. "What's the matter?" he asked. The Moraton hesitated. "Sir, your lung is behaving strangely, not taking in as much air as I would expect." Terran blanched, looking down at himself. Not only was this potentially life-threatening, it could also kill his chance at the exchange program. Which one? That seemed to bring the AP up short. Which one, sir?" the Moraton asked. "Yeah, left or right?" Terran twisted to look over his shoulder at... He finally remembered. Moratons were an all-female species, but each year about half of them briefly turned male during a mating season. He looked over his shoulder at her. She looked back at him, eye stalks trembling in befuddlement. "Left or... You have two?" In very human gesture, she dropped her disc-like head into her hands. "When I read the part about human lungs, I thought it was referring to them in collective," she moaned. The AP took a moment to compose herself. "Apologies, sir, for frightening you, and for my unprofessionalism." Terran chuckled and let out a huff of air in relief. "Apology accepted. I never thought about other species' organs. Do most of you just have one?" "Yes, we Moratons are rare, in that we have a double-chambered lung for amphibious function," she replied. The human nodded. "Huh. Learn something new every day." In the aftermath of the confusion and awkwardness that followed, the door slid open to admit the doctor. His own green outfit had what could pass for a duster coat built into the shoulders, the high collar of his suit clasped in front, obscuring his mouth. But to Terran's eyes, the Asav seemed miffed. "Mr. Warren," the doctor's voice was clipped. Asav didn't exactly have eyebrows, but the folds above his yellow eyes were tilted in a decidedly angry-looking cast. "I am unaware of how the human Commonwealth believes it appropriate to behave, but this is a medical facility. We treat medical history with the utmost seriousness, and I do not appreciate such forms being used for some sort of prank." Terran blinked, his eyes wide, and confusion written across his face. "I don't know what you mean, Doc." The doctor briefly paused. The earnestness in Terran's voice took him aback. "Hear you right. Your head exploded. I understand that Earth is a death world and humans are resilient, but you don't live through something like that. Or where you say you ground your nose to your skull. Once again, I see your nose clearly on your face." It was especially evident when compared to Asav noses, small things with slitted nostrils that barely protruded from the face. Terran shrugged, getting another reflexive admonishment from the assistant physician. "Your form asked me to list it in my own words." He defended himself. The physician looked unimpressed. "All right." He pulled up his chair and sat in it, glowering at Terran over his collar. "Explain, then." He theatrically scrolled through his tablet, back to the first entry. "You wrote, 'My first memory is as a baby crawling along and falling forward. My parents say my baby teeth went through my lip.'" Terran nodded. Still got the scar, see?" He reached up and turned out his bottom lip. The aforementioned scar was tiny, almost imperceptible, but there was a horizontal white line in the red meat of his mouth, just below his lip. But why the story about baby teeth? The doctor prodded. You're no reptile. Why the need to embellish? Once again, the human was utterly perplexed. What does being a reptile have to do with anything? They were my baby teeth. The physician tilted his head forward, looking at Taryn past his brow folds. He saw the equivalent of a glare. Again, why do you insist on having multiple sets of teeth? Because we do. Taryn's statement came out as a question. You're supposed to be a doctor. Didn't you get a pack about humans? She did. He jerked a thumb at the Moreton AP. We have a set of teeth that develop when we're babies and stick around for a few years. Some kids can start losing their baby teeth before they're even 6 years old, and then our adult teeth grow in. The doctor was likely grimacing behind his collar. The package spoke of adult human dental issues, not those of children. I apologize for being presumptuous. That said, the rest of this still reads like it was written by a madman. I refer again to the claim that you ground off your nose. Taryn's smile was self-deprecating. Hey, I'm no doctor, so I can tell you how it grew back. Just that it did. He looked at the AP. Since you're not examining me, could you make this thing more like a regular chair, please? The crustacean nodded and adjusted his seat until it was more like a proper seat. Thank you. As I was saying, it was a freak accident. I was about 5, maybe. I was out roller skating at the local tennis court, tripped over my dog, and hit the court face first. I skidded a long way and ground my nose down to the bone. Taryn chuckled with a little mirth, but not much. My parents boarded up all the mirrors so I didn't horrify myself. Had to keep seeing the doctor, and he was amazed when it started growing back. The Asav doctor made a noise in his throat. At least he didn't treat it as normal. Wasn't the weirdest thing he'd seen, but he was up there. Taryn smiled. Hey, I'm sorry, but you never did tell me your name, Doc. The Asav blinked. Ah, yes, I was irritated and forewent the normal pleasantries. Apologies. I am physician Dr. Thalek, and I must admit I'm morbidly curious now as to what the weirdest thing he'd ever seen was. Taryn shrugged, this time not receiving admonishment. Apparently, it only mattered when the seat was in its examination position. I'm not sure. The guy wasn't about to tell the most heinous details of his job to a kid just entering school. But I do know he knew a man who had heartworm. Dr. Thalek did his best not to wince. Of course, the human would have horrific-sounding creatures. How accurate of a name does this heartworm have? The human leaned on his left arm, gesturing with his right. Pretty damn. I'm no vet, so this is all just stuff I think I remember. It's a kind of parasite that can infect animals, typically dogs and cats. It can spread to humans, and while it's not as bad in us, it can still be dangerous. In animals, the things grow into long worms that fill up the heart. As you can imagine, that's fatal. In humans, the worms die before they can grow, but that still leaves the heart with dead worms. Horrific, Dr. Thalek murmured. And human bodies simply kill off their parasites. Taryn snorted. I wish. We have plenty of things that try to eat us. Tapeworms are some of the worst. They get in your guts and basically eat everything you do, taking a lot of your nutrients. The good thing is a lot of people don't even notice and just live their lives as normal. He shifted his weight to the other side. I heard cats used to have some sort of parasite that made you less able to assess danger. Somebody eventually came up with a gene therapy for that. So you are naturally this reckless, then? The doctor's voice was flat. All right. So what did you mean when you wrote that your head exploded? Taryn gave a self-deprecating smile. It's about the best explanation I can give in a soundbite. Dr. Thalek was unamused. Then give me the longer explanation. Okay, so this happened a little over a decade ago. I was visiting family, went out to dinner at this amazing restaurant. Best steak I ever had. I didn't really get to enjoy it though. About halfway through eating, I felt really sick. I made it back to my hotel room and started throwing up, then passed out. Now, Taryn continued, I figured this was some weird reaction to the change in climate between our ecology sections. Doesn't happen often, but it can happen. Well, the next day I learned that wasn't the case. My ear burst open, hence my head exploding. He made a gesture of expanding his hand from his ear, a little explosion sound coming from his mouth. My eardrum ruptured and blood sprayed out of it. Now I'll blame my next decision on the fact that my brain was already reacting weirdly to all of this. I figured this wasn't too bad since it didn't really hurt, so I soaked up the blood with a towel and went about my day feeling sick. The Asav stared flatly at him. Now you have to be joking. The human had the good grace to flush with embarrassment. Nope. Sadly, I'm not. I spent most of the day in bed just feeling sick, but not really hurting too bad. The next day, though, I still wasn't feeling well and I kept bleeding into the towel as I slept. So I went to a place called Urgent Care. Not sure if you Asav have something similar. It's basically for people who are having problems but don't think they need the emergency room. So you go there for something that's more time-sensitive, and you couldn't make a doctor's appointment. Well, they basically took one look at me and sent me to the emergency room. In the emergency room, the ER, there's always a lot of people in line waiting for help. The only way you jump the line is if you're in a life-threatening situation. I sat down to wait, and one of the nurses came up to me. Dr. Thalek knew where this was going. Let me guess. They told you to go to the front of the line. Taryn had the nerve to smirk. I got sent into one of the emergency rooms and the doctor started checking me over. So it turns out, and that should be on my medical history as well, my pain response is broken. Things that should be agony are typically only mild discomfort, while something that should be mild discomfort can hurt a lot, although I wouldn't say it goes as high as agony. The doctor told me I should have been thrashing and screaming so much that I should have been coughing up blood, and that if I'd shown up 10 minutes later, I'd probably be dead. Both of the medical professionals in the room looked horrified. At this point, Dr. Thalek was willing to accept that Taryn was telling the truth, which meant that this man had somehow been minutes from a horrible death. The assistant physician finally spoke up. What happened? What was it? Taryn gave a crooked half-smile. Well, we never really found out. We knew it was some sort of bacterial infection, so they gave me the broadest spectrum antibiotics they had, as well as the strongest. The doctor went in my ear with a vacuum and sucked out a bunch of nasty stuff. Apparently this thing had been eating through the bone of my skull and was making a beeline for my brain. Gods! Dr. Thalek gasped, not really caring about decorum. Best thing was, this was over the holidays, so I got to spend Christmas and New Year's in the hospital. Neither alien knew what those holidays entailed, but it was obvious that they were most likely meaningful. Taryn began to wind down his story, so after that I had to get transit back home, and that was only a small window. I had to go before my eardrum healed up, because the pressurization of transport could be catastrophic to a healing eardrum. Spent the next 6 months recuperating with a ruined sense of balance. Thankfully, just like my nose, my eardrum grew back, and as far as I know, my hearing's just fine. Is such a thing common? Infections like that? Dr. Thalek didn't sound much like a doctor at the moment, but he was beyond caring. Taryn hesitated, and that made the doctor's stomach drop out. It's not common, exactly, especially not on the arcologies, but there's always a story of some flesh-eating bacteria or new virus. But well, when you have billions of people, you're going to get a lot of 1 in a billion events. The AP chittered, her mandibles grinding against one another. I suppose we shouldn't be shocked that a death world breeds infections like that. But still, it's astonishing. The human nodded. Yeah, this kind of thing only happens on the news, you think. It never happens to anybody you know, until it happens to you. Physician Dr. Thalek looked down at the tablet. And here you have listed your last major medical issue. Another mystery infection. Please tell me. That one was not as bad. Well, it didn't almost kill me as far as I know. The Moraton AP swore under her breath. Taran chuckled. So I had this thing on my back. Thought it was a pimple at first. Do a sov get pimples? Was that in the human medical package? The doctor nodded. I'm aware of them. Continue. Right. So I thought it was just a pimple or an ingrown hair or something. It hurt, since it was right over my spine. But I figured whatever. Eventually it got bigger, so I squeezed it out in the shower. That hurt a lot, let me tell you. More than my head exploding. So take that as you will. Taran paused a moment, so it filled back up with pus. And around that time I figured something was wrong. I was using a hot compress to try pulling it out, and that was working. But I was still feeling sick. I had a dentist appointment, and he found an infection in my tooth. I made a doctor's appointment. He appended, but it was after the dentist's. So the dentist prescribed a broad-spectrum antibiotic, and then the doctor figured out that the infection had gotten into my spine. The assistant physician cringed. And yet, somehow, you survived again. She asked after her visceral reaction. Took about 2 weeks of regular medicine, and each dose left me in a foggy fugue state. So I was basically unproductive the whole time. If I hadn't gotten the doc to write me up proof of the condition, I'd probably have been fired. Dr. Thalek shook his head. So, you are just a mutant. Some sort of genetic anomaly who survives these nightmare scenarios. Taran shrugged, an increasingly common reaction through this discussion. Not as far as I know. I've been lucky, sure, but lots of people have survived much worse than I have. The physician let out a heavy sigh. All right, whatever. Your planet tries to burn you alive, so I guess I shouldn't be all that surprised. Having forgotten that his assistant physician, whose name was Drala, not that Taran had ever learned it, had already done the intake exam. The doctor withdrew his own probe and set it to stethoscope mode. The chair shifted to return Taran to examination position, and Dr. Thalek placed the device on Taran's back. The doctor hesitated. Mr. Warren, your lung is acting strangely. Drala let out a strangled laugh. They have two, sir. Dr. Thalek looked over at her, blinked twice, and then, oh, damn it all. That's right. Fine. Your lungs are in good working order. I already gave him the exam physician. He's in fine shape, the Moraton added. Dr. Thalek hung his head. All right then. After a few seconds of composing himself, the physician ambled over to a drawer and withdrew a syringe. We just need a blood sample to determine that you're not carrying any pathogens dangerous to the galactic community. Both medical professionals seemed fascinated by Taran's thick red blood, inserting the syringe into a nearby console. The computer quickly scanned for designated pathogens and came up clean. The physician let out a sigh. Go, get out of my office. You've given me enough nightmares for one lifetime. I'll confirm that you're not carrying any diseases and can start work in a soft space. Then you're somebody else's problem. Taran rose from the strange examination chair, stretching his arms above his head and bending back slightly with a grunt. Well, I'm sorry we got off on the wrong foot and, sorry I traumatized you. He asked more than stated that second part, unsure if he should even be apologizing for such a thing. "It was nice to meet you," the AP offered, in her croaking voice. Terran offered her a smile. Zarel was happily relaxing in the guest wing of Taranoing Cloak Medical Station. He might have to pay for his own juice, but the ambiance more than made up for the expenditure. His lounge of choice was modeled after the purple forest of Zarvonis, gentle music interspersed with the sounds of wildlife and rustling woods. He had a decent buzz going and was currently in debate with himself over whether he should have some more and get properly soused or begin curbing his indulgences. Terran had been gone for longer than he'd expected. If the human turned out to be unhealthy or infectious, that might explain the delay, and it would mean that Zarel was well within his rights to get drunk. Of course, the human could simply be making friends or horrifying his physicians with tales of humanity. It was at this crucial decision point when his communicator chirped. Terran was calling, asking his location. Zarel gave it, and then ordered a water to begin sobering up. Soon enough, the human entered the lounge. "Well, you took a while," Zarel said by way of greeting, his voice warbling more from the citrus still in his system. Terran shrugged. "Just had to clear up some questions, but I got a clean bill of health. They called him a mutant, a miracle, a walking nightmare. But Terran, he just wanted to do his job. Because on Earth, we don't evolve to conquer. We evolve to survive. And confuse the hell out of your doctors while doing it."